So what makes a university an institution of excellence? What are the priorities that great institutions place between the goals of research, teaching and service, service to the institution and service to the public? In a surprising conversation with Nobel Prize laureate in economics, MIT professor Josh Angrist, the order of priorities in American institutions is different from what is accepted in other places. And what he explains in the following conversation I had with him, I also heard from other scientists in American academia, namely that America has a different order of priorities. So join me to a conversation in which the winner of the 2021 Nobel Prize in Economics, Josh Angrist, defines what a great university is.
Hebrew University is doing reasonably well. So if you look at I'm here this week to teach, but I'm also part of an event where my picture was added to a wall of distinguished Hebrew University affiliates, faculty and students. And it includes other Nobel laureates. And it's pretty good for, a school like Hebrew University. It's a large public university. We would think of Hebrew University in the American context, it would be something like a flagship state school. So in the University of California system, the flagship is Berkeley. In the University of Michigan system, the flagship is Ann Arbor campus. And those are very selective, research-oriented public universities. And in that league, Hebrew University has done very well in terms of its scholarship. But of course, universities do many things. The primary mission of a university, as I see it, and I think most faculty would agree, is teaching. You want to produce educated, productive, engaged students who contribute to society. You can do that with or without research success. Research success is kind of a separate mission. There are schools that are very successful in research where the teaching might not be so great. And there are schools where the teaching is outstanding and there's not that much research. So for example, a good model of the latter kind of school is the American Liberal Arts College. I went to a place like that. I went to Oberlin College, which is a very small liberal arts college in Ohio, near Pittsburgh, where I grew up. And it has, I think, about 1,500 students, of whom 500 are music students. They have a conservatory of music, and then they have a college of arts and sciences. And the faculty there are not distinguished researchers. Some of them will publish maybe one paper over the course of their careers. But they do a good job training their students. Many of the Oberlin College graduates go on and do PhDs, like me, and become scholars. But Oberlin's measure of success is not research impact. So, policymakers, the public, parents, and students have to decide what they value. And what's nice about the American system is that there's a wide range of institutions. There's institutions of all types. There are a large number of not very selective schools that still, meaning they're not very selective of their applicants, but they still provide a very strong education and train their students and boost their students' earnings. Labor economists like me like to think in terms of the returns to schooling, the economic returns to schooling. We think of education as an investment. So each year of schooling has a return, like a financial asset. So if you own a portfolio like stocks, mutual funds, and savings bonds, and that sort of thing, you think about what is my return on that portfolio? If you get 10% a year, that's a pretty good portfolio. Well, schooling has a return of about 10% per year of schooling. And that's true across, at least in America, that's true across institutions of all types, including schools you've never heard of, where there's really very little research being done. Maybe you heard of Oberlin, but there are lots of obscure liberal arts colleges you probably haven't heard of that also serve their students very well. There are many public universities that don't do a lot of research. And within big public university systems, like the University of California, you have the kind of flagship research institutions like Berkeley and UCLA and San Diego, but you also have a lot of schools that are much less selective. There's not as much research going on. Examples would be like the Cal State schools, which are also public schools. But there's a big economic return for the graduates of those institutions. So success means a lot of things. And I think a successful higher education system tries to accomplish these multiple goals and maybe identify certain institutions. These are going to be places where we want to do a lot of research. We try to bring a large group of research faculty because we think it's beneficial for them to interact with each other. But most students are not interested in research, and they don't need to be taught by researchers. And in fact, a good researcher is not necessarily a good teacher. Well, if you want to have a strong research institution, you have to attract successful scholars. There aren't very many successful scholars. You know, successful scholarship, it's a lot like success in professional sports. It's a very narrow at the top pyramid, and it kind of flattens out, and there's a lot of people that do a little bit of scholarship early in their careers and maybe publish one or two scientific articles or research articles in whatever their field is. And then there's a small group of people that kind of make a career out of research. And those people tend to be concentrated in elite research institutions like top public universities like MIT, but also public schools like Berkeley and Michigan. And in the case of Israel, you have top research universities in the group of schools like Tel Aviv and Hebrew University and a few others, the Technion, are usually the first three that people think of. So, you know, those schools, they both provide a selection process. So you have to attract people. You know, so if Hebrew U wants to be a top flight research institution, it has to attract top scholars, but then it has to retain them. And we talk a lot at MIT about retention, about recruiting and retention. So on the recruiting side, we're primarily recruiting junior scholars. We're not so much in the business of looking for somebody who's already famous and then bringing them. Harvard does more of that. The Ivies do more of that, I would say. Senior hire, you know, look for the guy who maybe is going to win the Nobel next year or already won. Well, of course, it's obvious that that's a very successful scholar, and maybe you would like to attract that person, but they're very expensive also. You have to pay them well, and they might need expensive laboratory facilities or other infrastructure. So a more cost-effective strategy for MIT, and the MIT's kind of recipe for success has been to attract junior scholars. And when I was at Hebrew University as a faculty member in the 1990s, and I've continued to be connected with the school in the decades since, you know, I've always kind of seen that as the natural strategy that Hebrew University should try. There are many Israeli PhD students in economics at top programs all over the world, and quite a few of them will have distinguished careers. And you'd like to attract them when they're young and get them to come here and work. Even if they leave later on, you'll benefit from having them earlier in their careers when they tend to be more productive. And they won't be as expensive. So there's a recruiting, and we could say that's just selection. There's no value added. You just try to attract people. But to attract people, you have to provide a good environment. And a good environment for a researcher, you know, it's fairly straightforward. What does that mean? Not too much teaching, some. But if you're going to make me teach, you know, 3 courses a semester, I won't have much time for research, and I'm going to be pretty grumpy about that, even though I love teaching. I like to teach 1 or 2 classes a semester, ideally 1. And that leaves me time for research. But I definitely like to teach that 1. I enjoy that. It's fun. I get ideas for research. I like students. I like interacting with students. So there's kind of a mix there, a balance. Not too much teaching. You need to have research infrastructure. So in the hard sciences, that might be a laboratory. In social science, that's often computing infrastructure. You need state-of-the-art computing equipment and data storage equipment. And now economics has become more like a laboratory science, more like life sciences. We have a lot more infrastructure. At MIT, I'm part of a lab that I run with Parag Pathak and David Otter, two colleagues in the economics department, called Blueprint Labs. And we have a pretty big staff. We have a staff of full-time research managers and research assistants. And what the lab provides for us is a mechanism to hire young research assistants. So there's a sort of a human resources dimension to it. You know, anytime you're in the business of interviewing, recruiting, hiring, paying people, you know, there's a lot of support staff needed for that. There's paperwork, there are compliance issues, and of course also you need very carefully to search and find talented young people who will be productive research assistants, who will do a good job for you, and they'll enjoy the job as well, because if they don't enjoy it, they won't be happy and they won't be productive. And so we have a staff that does that. And the other thing is, because we do now a lot of very ambitious data collection, sometimes we're doing our own randomized trials. For example, I've been involved for the past 10 years in a project that allocates financial aid for higher education in a randomized trial. And it's a very complicated project. It involves a large number of college students in the state of Nebraska. It's funded by the Buffett Foundation. So there's a lot of management there in terms of figuring out who's in the experiment, doing the random assignment, tracking the people who were in the experiment, as if we were running a life sciences lab, doing clinical trials in medicine. It's a similar amount of infrastructure. So I need a staff to do that. So MIT provides me with that. I'm expected to write grant proposals and raise money to support that. But when we were just getting started, we didn't have the grant money. And MIT gave us a large seed grant to get started, enough to hire one or two people who can then help us raise money. We're always raising money. That's also more like, you know, economics is like the life sciences in that sense. You're always raising money for your next project. You're writing papers, you're analyzing data, and you're raising money. So you need to have the infrastructure for that. That's a research-oriented school that allows you to do that. If you don't support your faculty in that endeavor, you won't be a first-rate research institution.